Welcome, everybody. Welcome to commentary track for the very first Swedish erotica loop, The Virgin Next Door Part 1. I'm Greg Javer, and I write articles at the Dead Rights blog, at the Ed Wood Wednesdays portion of the Dead Rights blog, as well as host the Ed Wood Summit podcast. I'm happy to be here with you today.
And I am Keith Crocker of Cinephere Video and the Exploitation Journal. And it is my pleasure to be with all you lovely people today doing this commentary with Greg.
Thanks, Keith. So right off the bat, I think it's worth mentioning this actress has often been misidentified as Linda McDowell, who appeared in Playboy, appeared in some loops and some sex films as well. But Linda McDowell's far better known than this individual, who actually I emailed Keith earlier today when I looked at the IMDb page for this, and one of the reviews in the bottom noted that her name is Anna Lee Roper. And we did spot her just recently, Keith, right, in another film from 1974, a feature film called P.
Yeah.
But she's really not often somebody that you'll see around much, and I found virtually nothing about Anna Lee Roper. But some of the loops that we're going to review here in this box set are going to be frequenting Anna Lee Roper.
Yes, absolutely. And it was very exciting when you got in touch with me about this today, Greg, because we were able to pull together some mysteries, as the whole point of what we're doing is a form of archaeology. And we are trying to uncover as many things as we possibly can. Greg, do you want to talk about this prop a little bit?
Sure,
Yeah.
the owl painting with the eye holes cut out. So it appears here in the Virgin Next Door loop. It also appears, of course, in Necromania. So it appears on the wall in Necromania in the bedroom.
Yes. Absolutely.
I've seen it actually in a couple of other loops where it's not actually utilized as a voyeuristic sort of keyhole as it is here. It's kind of curious. He looks through two cutout eyes, and it looks like he's looking through a pair of binoculars.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. This is what, and Greg, I think our purpose is to basically bring together the idea that Ed Wood was deeply and heavily involved in the making of these loops, probably countless others, starting with cinema classics, and ultimately having been said to have directed the first 19 of the Swedish erotica series. The stylistic elements of this particular loop indicate a lot of connection to Necromania, and that right there in itself brings together the concept or the idea that Ed actually may have not just written these films, not just added the subtitles or the box summaries for them, but actually directed them. And some of the cinematic styling definitely reflects Necromania and The Young Marrieds, which we damn well know he did direct. So, did you want to expound on that a little bit, Greg?
Sure. And there's a lot of other connective tissue. You're noticing the subtitles here, and the subtitles start appearing on loops right around the time the Necromania and the Young Marrieds were actually shot. So a couple of series that actually predate Swedish erotica that were shot with some of the same set decorations shot in the same place. This happens to be Hal Guthu's studio set on Santa Monica Boulevard. Hal was a talent agent, also a cinematographer, and had a small studio set, which I have come to know very, very intimately after literally watching hundreds of loops and trying to piece this all together. So a couple of the common objects really quickly here are beyond the owl eyes, that large barrel lamp that's sitting on the desk in the opening scene. There's also this sort of fabric wall draping that's hanging behind them right now that looks like a ribbed sort of
Yes.
sheet almost. I could never tell what it is, but most often it's hanging on the
like
wall.
lining for a coffin as well.
Right. Sometimes they'll toss it on the bed. Sometimes they'll toss it on the floor.
Right.
This is John Holmes, by the way. I'm sure most of you recognize John Holmes if you've watched even a little bit of vintage pornography. He was generally considered the king. Right?
Well, you know, Greg, he was the king, and I'll just go on to say the very first 8mm pornographic loop that I saw probably in 1978 was a Swedish erotica, and it featured John Holmes. So John Holmes was really my introduction to hardcore pornography. So yeah, he was in his day a giant. Absolutely.
In more ways than one.
Yeah, not just to play on words, Greg.
Right.
He was literally a giant. He was the name.
Now this is pre-cocaine John Holmes, and sadly his life spirals into a very dark direction, and you can read all about that online and the latter years. But here in these early years, you can see him still, even in his performance, he's trying to appear very sensual and very sort of, at least in this particular loop, comes across as caring and loving. Of course, that's not the case through many other loops which trade on the fairly sadly typical rape fantasy of the era.
Right.
But
right.
This loop, by the way, we're note the clock, right? We're 2/3 of the way in, and we haven't really, other than his fantasy while voyeuristically masturbating, other than that, we haven't had any sex whatsoever in the loop. So I can only imagine what the person who bought this loop for $1973, a couple $100 in today's world, would have thought at this point. They're really thinking, when is the sex actually going to start?
Well, did you notice, Greg, and we talk in the beginning, we have a preview of the cum shot, of the money shot, and that was put in there because if you're buying the first loop of this being a double loop, if you're buying that, you need that. That could not be absent. So they'll find a way to put it in there. So basically we see that Holmes is fantasizing and thinking about what's ultimately going to happen. We also have some really nice photography here. If you don't mind, if people do not mind me saying, truthfully, these were very well shot. Compare them with the New York shot loops, which were very sloppy and in most cases very poorly shot. This is actually cinematic, which again points back to the influence of Ed Wood, trying to tell some sort of story. Trying to, even though it's as simple as it is right in front of your face, he's still trying to give you something because as a filmmaker, he wanted, I believe, to do more than what these loops were offering. So I think that's an important point.
For sure. And we also know that Ed did direct, from testimony, we have testimony that Ed directed on this very set at Hal Guthu's studio, from Rudolph Gray's indispensable Nightmare of Ecstasy, still after all these years, absolutely indispensable. And there's details from photographer Ted Gorley, who shot Necromania, along with Hal Guthu. They're both credited, actually. But Ted mentions there that Ed directed a loop where he portrayed a jailer. And since the book has been written, that loop, in fact, turns up. And there are common set decorations between Young Marrieds and Necromania, as well as this larger body of loops. So we know that Ed was there at one point in time, definitively, to shoot at least one loop, but there's so many others that are intricately related, and we're going to move on to talk about the next one here momentarily, The Virgin Next Door Part 2, coming up. I'm back. This is Greg Javer. I'm back with Keith Crocker. We're here to discuss The Virgin Next Door Part 2. So this one's a two-part loop, Keith. There's 19 loops shot in LA, as far as we understand, the first 19 Swedish erotica loops. 20 and 21 perhaps shot a few years later. That starts on the Santa Monica Pier, so we're still in Southern California. But we do see the loops move to shoots in San Francisco from that point forward. There's actually a lot of color climax loops and foreign loops sprinkled into this endless Swedish erotica series as time wears on. But by 75 or so, 76 certainly at the latest, we're in San Francisco on sets, and testimony is that it was the director Bob Fosse, aka Don Brown, who actually was directing the loops by that point in San Fran. But so what do we think is happening here at this point in time, Keith? And also one other question for you, because I know you have your own 8mm copies of The Virgin Next Door and The Virgin Next Door Part 2, actually the whole entire first 19 loops. But I remember seeing your box, and I think it had a 1972 copyright on it, if I recollect.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did, Greg. You saw an original. You saw an original that came out of that time. You didn't see a re-release, and they would frequently re-release these loops. I mean, once you had them, you used them. So they would wait a period of time and then they would re-release them, especially once Holmes' stardom became bigger. Okay, so yes, there are many in that collection that I have, Greg, that have the 1972 copyright as well as catalog that went along with the sale of those loops. Greg, I'm going to go in to say this. These films and Swedish erotica are the brand of Noel Bloom. Bernard Bloom was the father, if I've got that correct, and he started in pornographic magazines and novellas, and ultimately would move himself over to 8 millimeter films that was softcore. So that's the cinema classics. I spoke with Noel Bloom in, I believe it was either April, May of 2021. And according to Noel Bloom, he made all of these loops. He made the assertion that he and Illo Appleby, being the cameraman, were the ones who put these loops together, that he directed them and shot the stills, and Illo Appleby shot the actual footage. He also claimed to know of Ed Wood's involvement with his father and Ed Wood's shooting Necromania, but Noel identified Necromania as a softcore short, and it is not a softcore short, it is a hardcore feature. And when I told him that, he claims somebody must have added footage. But nobody added footage. We have behind-the-scenes photographs of Ed directing Necromania. So there's a memory thing going on here. He has a different view than what we know, okay, of Necromania. So again, we know that Ed directed Cinema Classic loops, The Jailer being a perfect example because Ed is actually in it. He appears at the end of it. So the concept that Ed kept directing for a period of time is extremely realistic. It was what's his name? Who actually claimed in the book that he directed the first 19 Swedish eroticas? Conrad Brooks, right? It was Conrad Brooks who went on record to say that Ed directed the first 19 Swedish eroticas. But we also have Ed directing a number of hardcore cinema classics, of which Noel Bloom told me they never did hardcore in cinema classics. So there's some kind of lapse in memory. Something is a little mixed up here. And again, this is a part of the reason why we push the importance and the fact that Ed Wood was, and I still do believe, clearly involved with these loops, to right down to the point of directing him. There'd be no other point to have him on set but to be directing them. Once I think it was picked up how easy these things could be directed, there was no longer any point to bring Ed on them anymore. Keep him writing. That's what he excelled at. We all know that. We know that he could grind out articles, books, very, very fast, and Noel did tell me that. Noel spoke of Ed's ability to write and to get things done real quickly, and that he spoke of with high enthusiasm. So, Greg, that's what I wanted to share with everybody. This was the conversation I had with Noel. I have been invited back to speak with him again, and I will do so. But at this point, this is what I got from Noel Bloom when I spoke to him in April, May of 2021.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, that's great that you were able to get in touch with him. Does contradict some of what we think we know for sure, right? But the Cinema Classics loop, so that was kind of the flagship series and did, as Keith mentioned, start out as softcore. But Cinema Classics was sort of the overarching initial film company, Cinema Classics. So that encapsulated a lot of different loop series. You notice probably the graphic at the beginning of these two loops, the Adult Cinema Presents, with the kind of swirly graphic coming towards us. You'll see that at the beginning of other related loop series. And some of those that precede this, some of the earliest subtitled loop series, I believe, are Pussycats, as well as the Danish International Film Series, which is quite a sprawling series that goes on at great length and is shot right on the Guthu sets as well, with a little bit earlier generation of set decorations by and large, the decorations you would see more so on the set for Necromania and The Young Marrieds as opposed to Swedish erotica. So I think Swedish erotica follows on the heels perhaps of the Danish International Film Series. There's other related series, like I said, VIP Films, Fanny Films, Garter Girls, and there's more beyond that. As
Glad you mentioned Fanny and Garter, Greg, because we also have seen influence of Ed Wood in those as well, and there's a very good possibility he may have also started them off as well. So, yeah.
Sure. Sure. The subtitles are consistent. In fact, you probably may have already noticed that we're going to start seeing subtitles repeat themselves in different loops. And so they're just going to reuse the optical title card. It's an economic thing to do, right? It makes a lot of sense to do it. Subtitles are fairly sparse here in these first couple loops. That will vary over time in subsequent subtitle series. They're so consistent that it is literally right down to the fonts of the subtitles. They match up, the words within the subtitles that are common to Ed Wood, et cetera, et cetera. So there's, again, a lot of connective tissue that leads me to exactly the same conclusion that Keith and I share, which is that Ed Wood played a large hand. And again, the attributions may be a little fuzzy from way back in the early 70s, but based on the clues and how we can connect the dots, we can definitely see a very highly related body of work here. And we close on the shot of the owl as we opened on part one. So that's a nice little way to frame it entirely. So now we'll be talking about a few more of this Swedish erotica loops on the commentary tracks here on this set. So please check those out. Welcome everybody. I'm Greg Javer, back with another loop commentary. And again, back with Keith Crocker, here to talk today about Swedish erotica number 4, the 4th in the series. And this happens to be a Western, Keith, Western Lust.
You better believe it, Greg. And Greg, I think I said this to you, or I might have said it, maybe it was on one of the blogs. I said that these adult films are directed in a style that's very similar to the commercials that Ed Wood shot in the late 1940s for television stations to buy and insert their own logos in. And the way the actors are the way they are posed, the way they are told to interact, it's a direct correlation. No, there's no question in my mind that Ed Wood, we know that Ed Wood for a fact directed those commercials. He's in them. And his style is repeated right here. Also of interest, Greg, as you just brought it up, a Western. What did Ed Wood love? He loved Westerns. That was probably after horror sci-fi, his next favorite genre. So and we know that he had messed around. We've got the films that he did early on in an attempt to shoot Westerns. Here it is. He managed to, this is the beauty of it, Greg. He managed to bring his interests into these loops. In other words, in order to make this exciting for him, and also to create the excuse of wanting to tell a story. Because you know this, Greg, a lot of these producers were like, no, just give us the sex. Right. But clearly, my argument is that Ed Wood is one of the men who pushed the boundaries and got us to storytelling within erotica. So, yeah, the Western setting, right down to the roughness of it and some of the gruff dialogue, which you pointed out, Greg, goes back to World War II pornography. Goes back to the type of humor, or not just humor. Humor is one of it. Yeah, a lot of it would be humor, but some of it is also just the basic pornography of the World War II era, which was aimed at soldiers and which was much rougher. And we know about Ed having been in the military. In one way, shape, or form. Not what we initially thought. Right. But yeah, Ed's interest in having been part of the military and his interest in almost literally recreating the type of humor or the type of sexuality that he read about in a magazine or might have seen in a 40s era loop. Well, it's right here in front of you. And we know that Ed was a fanboy. We want to say, Greg, that Ed was the first fanboy filmmaker. So one of the first. So his interest in subject matter, genre subject matter, is what is on display here. And I don't think there's any question about it.
Right.
I don't think there's a question about it, Greg, but
Absolutely.
Yeah,
There's an attempt here with the set decorations to make this appear as if it's some old cabin, obviously. So this is in some setting in the past. Of course, we also have some contemporary objects, and the two folks are dressed in quite contemporary fashion. There was a turning point there for everybody to take note of a moment ago, where she turns from having been abducted and then being raped to now it feels so good. That's a
yeah,
very common trope, a sad trope that happens often again in many of these loops where uh, I say it, and I don't mean it to sound like I'm joking, but it's kind of it only hurts that first line of thinking. And in fact, that's a subtitled loop that comes up in other loops across the larger sort of Bloom-related series. One other thing to point out, this is Hal Guthu's set again, very hard to tell. You'd have to be pretty familiar with the set. Do you notice the map over the gentleman's shoulder?
absolutely.
That same map is on the wall in Virgin Next Door, if you're eagle-eyed. And notice the rope structure to the left edge of the screen. That's kind of a little bondage device that appears in another Hal Guthu shot loop called Virgin on the Ropes. And in that loop, you can tell that it's obviously meant to be a little bit of, again, some sort of bondage device, but here it's just more bric-a-brac for the background of the set.
Interesting. Did you also notice how he's taking moments, Greg, to again set up a story? He shows us the gun.
Yeah.
He actually, now remember, like I said, there in general, the producers of these type of films did not really early on. Well, they didn't even see these films having a continued life. There was no imagining that there would be a day like today where you and I, Greg, are giving a commentary on a DVD, as these things didn't exist. So the basic logic was, we're going to shoot these things, we're going to sell these things. There might not be a trail left. But what comes very clear here, and this is really what made Swedish Erotica stand out for a period of time, was an attempt to tell a story, to throw in props, to decorate a scene. As I said, this differs tremendously from the New York pornography, which I felt the early New York loops were very sloppy.
Yeah.
A lot of the Bob Wolf shot stuff was very sloppy. Greg, can
Well,
we also talk about this, the element of fetish, and
oh yeah.
what fetish meant to Ed Wood? Did you want to maybe expound,
Well,
Greg?
of course, Ed is pretty well known for having an Angora fetish and being having generally a fetish for kind of fluffy finery and things of that nature. If you read a lot of his texts, it comes up constantly. In fact, it's almost a signature. His Angora fetish is nearly a signature of his texts. That begs a rabbit hole that I'm not going to take us down right now. But Ed's sexuality, of
Yeah,
course, as we understand it, Ed liked to dress in women's clothing, but was through and through a identifying as a male heterosexual. That is worth a conversation for another day, I believe.
absolutely.
Right,
Well,
right.
there's no question about it. And it's interesting because I think it was Conrad Brooks who said it again, that Ed, when he was making these films, had people doing things that weren't done before. He sort of was carrying on in the book Nightmare of Ecstasy, that Ed was making these really wild movies. And technically, yes, they are offering you more than, like I said, was coming out of the New York scene. So there's a cinematicness to them that tends to work. A lot of this is about gratification. A lot of it is about giving head. There's going to be a lot of these shorts ending with oral cum shots. The oral cum shot is still very popular in pornography, both amateur and pro. So it's but and what I might argue here, Greg, is that that Ed Wood is one of the trendsetters
It's
for
kind
this.
of, for lack of a better term, it's the signal or the permission for the man to finally complete his
Yes,
activity as he watches along. As we wrap this one up, as we wrap up Western Lust, I want to say, so this is again for only the fourth loop out of the first 19. We've reviewed a couple of others. I think you can hopefully see now the stylistic elements, the way the camera sometimes will pan up the wall, the way that in some cases we haven't seen it as much in these few loops, but it's rampant in the Bloom related loops where cameras walk into and away from the camera. So you see a lot of the clearly the same creative principles, separate and apart from the definitive Ed Wood direction, there's definitely the same set of creative principles working on these loops. And we'll talk more about another one here on this box set. So check out all of our commentary tracks.